Next station, City Center.
20 acres, 2 blocks, 165 years. On maps, they're known simply as Blocks 75 and 76. But to those who have worked, lived, and played here, Blocks 75 and 76 are a world unto themselves. Defined and redefined by the forces of economics and society, built up, torn down, and built again.
The evolution of those 2 blocks of downtown is really quite a fascinating case study of the way cities change over time. If you go to Rome and you look at the history of a block where there may not be as many changes over 500 years or over 800 years, to see so many changes over our blocks over 150 years really is uncanny.
Over the years, Blocks 75 and 76 have been home to people, businesses, entertainment, and the steady flow of a city in motion. In a sense, these blocks have defined the life and times of the city. The story of the heart of Salt Lake City is a story of vision, dreams, failure, and renewal.
Programming support for Salt Lake City, a Downtown Story, was made possible by the members of KUED in partnership with Zions Bank, bringing value and vibrancy to our communities through support of quality local productions, and the Larry S. and Allison Smith Challenge Fund, encouraging individuals and businesses throughout Utah to support KUED community affairs programming.
On July 28, 1847, Brigham Young looked over the semi-arid landscape and publicly proclaimed that a temple would be built where he stood. Soon, an entire city was laid out, all radiating from the temple block. Just across the street, 2 perfectly square, 10-acre blocks were given numbers 75 and 76 on the first plat of Great Salt Lake City. In the beginning, it was a self-sufficient agrarian community with virtually no commercial establishments. Blocks were subdivided into smaller lots that featured small homes with garden plots and fruit trees. A communally cultivated field was fenced off just south of town. Farmers lived in the city and rode to the field to do their work. The city government and the church government were one and the same. The council house, finished in 1851, embodied this public-private partnership. Located on the northeast corner of Block 76, the 2-story building served not just as an assembly hall for city government, but as offices for the Deseret News, a library, city and county courts, the territorial legislature, church offices, and a practice hall for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. But its prestigious life was short-lived. Just 32 years later, a nearby stockpile of gunpowder ignited in a spectacular explosion, taking the council house and several adjacent buildings in the fire that ensued. Next door, the shop of local photographer Charles Roscoe Savage was decimated, and many of his glimpses into the pioneer era were lost forever. As the blocks began to take on a more commercial flavor during the first 20 years of Mormon settlement, privately owned big business still did not exist. But looming on the horizon, change was steaming west. Pony Express riders bearing information from the outside were soon replaced by the electric highway, a simple but blazing fast means of communication called the telegraph. The transcontinental telegraph line first came to life on October 24, 1861, at 61 South East Temple Street. 8 years later, on May 10, 1869, a golden spike was driven at Promontory Summit, Utah, and the nation was linked in a way that would change it forever. The quiet agrarian landscape on Blocks 75 and 76 quickly began giving way to a business district powered by an influx of new arrivals and directed by the insatiable appetite of capitalism.
There was no plan for a commercial district. In 1850, the church built a storehouse that they rented or leased to Livingston and Kincaid, who was a firm from St. Louis. And later that same year, a couple other merchants set up stores further south. And so quite soon, East Temple Street, which is the original name, became called Main Street.
Brigham Young, hoping to shield the church from the oncoming economic competition, encouraged its business establishments to join together into what was known as Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution. More than 30 small shops banded together under one roof, forming an early department store and a formidable player in the now bustling commercial district on Main Street. For Frontier residents, shopping at ZCMI was unlike anything they'd done before. Called the People's Store, they passed through the now famous iron facade on Main Street and were greeted by thousands of items, from boots, clothing, wagons, sewing machines, lumber, furniture, textiles, and beauty products. In 1 year, the in-house shoe factory, dubbed the Big Boot, manufactured over 83,000 pairs of shoes and boots.
It was very successful. Within 5 years, they'd added a large addition to the south. It was very popular and was really the dominant store in Utah for generations.
By the late 1880s, the city's population had more than doubled, and a building boom was underway. The McCormick Block on 74 South Main Street was one of Salt Lake City's first major office buildings. It reached the dizzying height of 7 stories. Streets and sidewalks were paved for the first time, ditches covered, and other multi-story brick and stone buildings sprang up, replacing much of the original frame and adobe structures. Soon, only one pioneer structure would be left to remind people of the past, and even that building would not last. Completed in 1872 by designers William Folsom and Joseph Ridges, the Victorian mansion, located on the corner of State Street and South Temple, was formerly known as the Gardo House. It was to be an official residence for Brigham Young, but was not completed before his death. By 1901, the church had sold the residence to Colonel Edwin F. Holmes. Colonel Holmes' wife, Susanna Bransford Emery Holmes, had made her fortune from investments in the silver mines of Park City. Called the Silver Queen, she received the Gardo House as a birthday present from her husband. Spending thousands on remodeling and decorating the home with treasures acquired from their world travels, the Holmes began inviting the predominantly non-Mormon social elite to call when they were in town, sometimes bringing in over 300 guests per week. No other homes on Blocks 75 and 76, before or after, could compare to the grandeur of the Gardo House. Its elegant appointments, stately guests and tenants, and the thousands who passed through its front door gave it a singular legacy. Though a building boom in the 1880s brought an increasing cosmopolitan flavor to the area, an earlier structure on Block 75 had been going strong for 20 years already. The Salt Lake Theater, completed in 1862, was a well-known stop for the era's best-known entertainers and actors as they crossed the continent. Long championed by Brigham Young as an appropriate outlet for the church, music, dancing, and play acting had continued uninterrupted from the church's previous city of Zion in Nauvoo, Illinois. As a result, a well-practiced tradition led many visitors to remark on the high-quality offerings from the pioneer-era theater. So important was this recreational outlet, the theater was completed even before the famous tabernacle on Temple Square. The people must have amusement, said Brigham Young, as well as religion.
The season has begun at Brigham's Great Theater, which is open 2 or 3 nights of every week. With 2 exceptions, the company are all amateurs and Mormons, but they play exceedingly well, and the entertainments are, in all respects, better than we find anywhere else in the Union, save it for our 5 leading metropolitan theaters. New York Daily Tribune.
At the time it was complete, it was really the biggest building in town. From the time that Salt Lake was settled, the inhabitants were interested in theater. I mean, there wasn't really a lot to do for entertainment. So I think Brigham Young realized that people need more than just their everyday work and even church activities. They needed something else to have a well-rounded life.
The Salt Lake Theater was iconic. Stories of early residents paying for tickets in kind, of packed houses night after night, of local companies made up entirely of volunteers, add to its reputation as the cultural heart of the city. Before gas and electricity arrived, 385 oil lamps illuminated the theater, where 1,600 locals sat in 3 tiers. Perhaps one of the brightest stars to emerge from the Salt Lake Theater was Sarah Alexander. After settling in Salt Lake City, her talents soon came to the attention of Brigham Young, who hired her to teach his daughter's dancing lessons, and her social circles soon expanded. One evening, while filling in for an absent actress during a rehearsal, the director offered her the role. She refused 3 times, but finally accepted the part because Brigham Young wished she would. In just a few years, Sarah's reputation on the stage elevated her to legendary status, not only among her peers, but across the country. She played prominent roles in Hamlet, Macbeth, and Richard III. Sarah never married, but that wasn't because she never had offers. One actor who was working for a time in Salt Lake City approached Brigham Young to ask about proposing. "Young man," the president replied, "I've seen you attempt Richard III and Julius Caesar with fair success, but I advise you not to aspire to Alexander." Legend has it that just a few years later, after Sarah had left Salt Lake City to take the national stage, another Salt Lake star was born at the theater. A local actress had brought her own infant on stage during a production of The Lost Child as a last-minute substitute. Calm and docile as ever, she was reported to have been the perfect child for the title role. The child, named Maude Adams, would receive her first leading role at the age of 16 in New York, and her beauty and talent would soon win the hearts of the entire country. The end of the 19th century was known as the Golden Age of the theater, and both Maude Adams and Sarah Alexander found themselves in the top tier of performers. Adams starred as Peter in Peter Pan, and by the mid-teens was making more than $1 million a year, the highest-paid entertainer of her time. Sarah Alexander's career continued to grow as well. At age 77, she accepted an offer from 20th Century Fox to play character roles in motion pictures. By the time she died in 1926, at the age of 87, she was heralded as the nation's oldest living actress. Her death brought mourning not only in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, but in Salt Lake City as well, where the now aging Salt Lake Theater was facing its own mortality. The pioneer-era structure was aging rapidly, and many caught up in the progressivism of the 1920s thought it best to tear it down, though they did so reluctantly.
It may be that its days are numbered. Perhaps its race is run. Well, if so, we must bow down to the inevitable. But whether it shall stand to carry on or fall before the march of modern progress, let us not forget that this romantic and hallowed old playhouse, this cathedral in the desert, has been a sacred shrine symbolizing the sentiments and ideals of our revered pioneers. That within its walls have been developed the community's very heart and soul. George D. Piper, theater manager.
1920s was a boom time for America, and the emphasis was on building new things. And these buildings, the Salt Lake Theater and the Gardo House, that was just kind of old-fashioned. That was old Salt Lake. Those who had control of the property, they were interested in building a new Salt Lake.
The debate over saving the theater lasted for months. Some suggested to moving it to another location, but the cost was prohibitive. In the end, officials decided to raze the pioneer-era structure. During its final farewell gala on October 20th, 1928, dignitaries and leaders from across the region came to pay their final respects to the old playhouse.
The Salt Lake Theater had held thousands of magnificent and thrilled audiences, but never had it housed a more notable, heart-throbbing audience than that which crowded its walls from pit to dome to witness the last fall of the historic curtain on Saturday evening. There were misty eyes when Mr. Piper concluded his reminiscences. He recalled briefly the many interesting events in the old days of the Playhouse and the 30 years he had acted as manager. In conclusion, he thanked the boys of the theater staff, and sweeping his glance over the entire interior, bade the theater farewell. Salt Lake Tribune.
After the theater cleared that evening, after the doors closed for the last time, and after the wrecking ball knocked over the last stone, the lot was cleared. Several months later, a gas station materialized on the site. As the Industrial Revolution shifted into high gear at the turn of the 20th century, American cities rode a wave of unprecedented economic development and expansion. Salt Lake City was no exception. As more people flocked to the city catered to their tastes. People began living there not only as residents, but as participants, spending a part of themselves in the bustle of humanity and taking home with them a piece of community.
There's a lot that's been written about the democracy of the street. Streets are arguably the most important organs of cities. So those are the places where everybody feels that they have a place. No matter how you look, no matter how old you are, no matter how you're dressed. Those are the places where everybody is welcome.
By the 1920s, Blocks 75 and 76 had become a complex grid of stores, businesses, and apartment houses. In the space of only 2 of those blocks, dozens of doors led to establishments like Utah Cafe, White Sewing Machine Company, the Deseret News, Zion's Savings Bank and Trust, ZCMI, Wasatch Lawn Cemetery Office, Painless Withers Dental Company, and Dane's Music. When it came to mixed use, Main Street was about as mixed as it could get.
They had boarding houses and music stores. They had a small grocer. They had a shoe repair. They had a movie theater. They had a bank. I love the idea that you could just live on this one block and never cross a street and get everything you needed done.
Like many main streets in the Roaring '20s, Salt Lake's rode the crescendo of prosperity, and its downtown had become the clear commercial hub of the entire region.
In planning, we use the phrase the 100% corner. The 100% corner is that place in a city which is the most active, the most vital, the most economically significant, socially significant. And in Utah, the 100% corner is South Temple and Main Street.
On the corner of Main Street and South Temple, where the Zion's Bank building now stands, the stylish Templeton Hotel stood for 70 years. When it opened in 1890, it boasted an elegant reading room, barber shops, and guest rooms with electric lights and appliances. Directly across Main Street on Block 76, the lot that once held the Council House had seen multiple uses over the years. During the 1897 Jubilee, it hosted a museum built to resemble the Greek Parthenon. Called the Hall of Relics, it temporarily housed a number of pioneer artifacts. However, as the turn of the century neared, the site would be razed once again for a new permanent structure that would house Utah's largest newspaper, the Deseret News. Designed by renowned local architect Richard K.A. Kletting, the new building was 6 stories tall and featured the city's 2 fastest elevators. By 1911, the Deseret News had brought in the fastest printing press between Chicago and the West Coast. Called Old Betsy, it could pump out 32,000 newspapers per hour. But while the presses sped out an endless stream of newsprint, another communication revolution was quietly underway. In 1922, from atop the building, a faint electromagnetic signal flew into the atmosphere and was picked up by only a few with the equipment to decipher the strange new medium.
Hello, hello, hello. This is KZN. KZN, the Deseret News, Salt Lake City calling. KZN calling. Greetings.
It was May 6, 1922, and Nate Fulmer's excited words opened the first radio broadcast in Utah. Situated atop the Deseret News Building, KZN, later known as KSL, became Salt Lake City's first radio station. Crowding outside the Radio Shack that day were LDS Church President Heber J. Grant, his wife, and other church and community leaders. Mrs. Grant remarked,
I think this is one of the most wonderful experiences of our lives. I would not be surprised if we were talking to the planets before many years.
KZN joined the ranks of just 30 radio stations in existence that year in the United States. Only 1 year later, the number would grow to 556 stations, all broadcasting to over 500,000 receivers. The teens and 20s saw unprecedented growth in downtown Salt Lake. The city came alive as never before. Up and down Main Street, shoppers shoulder to shoulder raced over the sidewalks. However, a new phenomenon would soon emerge that would force blocks 75 and 76 again to attune to the times: the automobile. The automobile made Salt Lake the downtown for people living hundreds of miles away, and they came in cars by the thousands. Salt Lake's celebrated streetcar lines had vanished by 1941, and the roads were now dominated by Fords and Chevys, fresh off Detroit assembly lines. Soon, more historic structures were raised, this time to make way for parking lots.
One can see the role of the automobile as being utterly transformative. We began to devote, in some cases, up to 50% of the land just to the automobile.
The first parking terraces in Utah were built on those blocks. Temple Square Hotel, they built the Temple Square parking terrace behind it in the 50s. And then ZCMI built a big parking terrace about that same time period, which was being done all over the country.
Despite the intrusive influence of the automobile on blocks 75 and 76, this was an unprecedented period of growth and vitality for the area. And grow it did. After World War II, America was on an economic high. Suburbs materialized east, west, and south of the city, and the further out they developed, the less their occupants felt the tug of Salt Lake's commercial district. Slowly but steadily, downtown's glimmer faded as shoppers opted for outlets closer to home. Downtown developers decided they needed to take quick action if they wanted to compete with suburban retail centers. Their decision led to the largest disruption Block 75 ever encountered. By 1975, the completion of the ZCMI Center consolidated over 3/4 of the block into one massive shopping mall and accompanying parking terrace, and the street was essentially moved indoors. 5 years later, the Crossroads Plaza brought a 2.2 million square foot shopping mall, parking terrace, and office space to Block 76. While the mall corridors teemed with life, it was a new, different kind of life, one that only awoke during business hours. It was different, but it was hugely successful. For a while. Only 30 years later, the downtown malls were completely torn down.
Back in the 70s and 80s, city councils and planning commissions and chambers of commerce used to say, what would we do to revitalize our downtowns? What do we do to draw people to our downtown? But the way that the great urbanist Jane Jacobs described it is that was a ridiculous question. Why would you try to draw people to your downtown, put people downtown? And that's what's happening now by having people living there 24 hours a day.
Today, Blocks 75 and 76 are being built anew, again. Brick and mortar residential buildings now sit alongside shops and offices. Richard Street has reappeared as a pedestrian walkway. City Creek has been lifted from its subterranean passageway and now takes an outdoor, slightly irregular route through a curved canyon of storefronts, each sheathed in panes of glass. Across the street, a grocery store has brought standard food prices within easy walking distance. For the first time in more than 40 years, Blocks 75 and 76 are becoming a place where many people call home.
I think if we look around the world at those places that are vital, vibrant parts of cities, they have a 24-hour-a-day life, that mix of uses that's 24 hours a day. And that mix of uses is not just over the hours of the day, but it's the kind of uses that are there. And that's now returning to both of those blocks. I think we really have come to understand that the liveliness of a city is about its people and their ability to live complete lives in any part of the city.
A new era dawns for the heart of the city, and no one can forecast what the future will bring. But somehow, it's fitting the 21st century of Salt Lake City has returned to reminders of its early beginnings. Rail cars clang through the streets once again. Small shops will put their dreams on the line. A grand theater is part of the vision, just as it was 150 years ago. And an American city with deep and enduring roots turns the page.
Programming support for Salt Lake City, a Downtown Story, was made possible by the members of KUED in partnership with Zions Bank, bringing value and vibrancy to our communities through support of quality local productions, and the Larry S. and Allison Smith Challenge Fund, encouraging individuals and businesses throughout Utah to support KUED community affairs programming.